Hello there, how are you? Welcome back to How I Did It. Well, I finally hit 50 hours on the Kabota, so it's time to do the 50-hour maintenance. So we have the oil filter, fuel filter, transmission filter, and hydraulic filter. And then I went ahead and lubed it. And this video is going to show you how I did it. Haha. Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump in there, open the hood, and pull this side panel off. That's going to give us easy access to the oil filter, but when you see how it's positioned, you're going to be like, what the heck? Somebody who didn't do maintenance on vehicles must have stuck that thing in there. First thing you do is slide this screen out from in front of your radiator, and you can blow it off or do like I did here and just use a broom and brush off any of your grass clippings and whatnot that may have gotten in there. And then it just slides right back down in between these little side brackets, whatever. And now we're just going to go ahead and check our radiator fluid. Fluid looks great. Doesn't need to be changed yet. They do call for changing it later on, but that's quite a ways down the road later on. And then we're just going to top off our overflow reservoir. Clean up the antifreeze so Miss Stella doesn't get into it. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to the oil change. Now, they must have put everything on this motor and then painted the motor, because the oil drain plugs and the oil filter were such a bear to get off. So I went ahead, I got this loosened up, then I went underneath and I started tackling the oil drain bolts. Had to chip the paint off of them in order to fit the 14mm socket on them to be able to get them off of there to drain the oil. Now that one that I'm working on right there, it was on there with so much paint that the brass washer was stuck to the bottom of the oil pan. I had to pop that off and then clean the paint off of it outside of being underneath there. So I went ahead and pulled these two drain bolts out, drain plugs, whatever, and then I went up top and opened the oil fill. It allowed it to drain much quicker. And then while it was finishing the drain, then I went ahead and finished chipping paint. That's just crazy. So much overspray underneath there. But it's clear. It's good to go for all future oil changes. Now the beauty of this Kabota, it's pretty easy to work on. It's kind of like your old school cars. And as you remember, I loosened this up already, so this was pretty easy just to grab a hold of it and spin it off. Telling you what, that's some long threads on that. I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. I was like, holy cow, what in the world? Anyway, you get the gist of it. And what's nice is this just spins off lefty-loosey and the new one goes on there righty-tighty. So my grandfather taught me, whenever you open up any kind of a filter that has those rubber O-rings on there, you always take the type of fluid and run it around that rubber O-ring prior to installing it. So that's what I'm doing here, just putting a little bit of oil on that rubber O-ring. And apparently I didn't have my camera running, so you just get the oil filter already installed in there. And then we're just going to top it off. Now just make sure you don't overfill it. It'd kind of be a bummer if you have to go back underneath there and pop one of those plugs out. This ended up taking about 3/4 of a gallon or 3.5 quarts. Worth a 10W30 that I have there. And that put it about in the middle of the dipstick, slightly higher than in the middle on the dipstick. Don't forget to put your cap back on. So as soon as you pull that funnel out of there, make sure you put the cap on. And then here I'm just going ahead and starting it up. Make sure no leaks at the oil filter, no leaks at my drain plugs. With that step complete, we'll go ahead and put this side panel back in and close the hood, and we can move on to the rear of it. Now this just slides in there. It has a couple of pins towards the back right there. Line it up with those pins. There we go. And then the front just snaps down on this bracket. There is no nut, bolt, anything holding them on. That easy. Really a pretty unique setup. So now we're just going to go ahead and do the fuel filter. Tried to move ahead too fast, I think. Fuel filter's on the right side or the passenger side. As you can see, that fuel filter's pretty dirty compared to the new one. The oil pan that I have under there worked perfectly for all of my fluids that ended up dripping out or draining out, including this little bit of diesel here that we lost. So once I unscrewed it, didn't need any tools to unscrew it. I did need needle nose pliers to grab a hold of the actual fuel filter itself to pull it out. And there's two O-rings, one large black O-ring, and you'll see that sitting down next to the new filter there. But there's also another tiny O-ring inside of this. I'll cut most of this off in the camera, but you can see it right there. What I ended up doing is using the tip of the razor knife and carefully getting it out of there without nicking it or cutting it so I could reuse it. I didn't realize that it had the O-rings on there, or I would have probably ordered new ones. But this worked out perfectly and I had no leaks. So I put the tiny one back down in there and I went ahead and set the big one on. Well, after I put it down in here. And just a heads up, I actually filled this cup with diesel prior to reinstalling it. I don't know if that would make any difference, but I was afraid I would have a vacuum, like that air vacuum that they talk about you getting, and then having a whole bunch of problems. So I just went ahead, filled it up with diesel, and then once I put pressure on it to put it back up on there, the diesel started running out of the tank. So it was pretty cool. And then I don't know what I was thinking writing the date on the clear cup that holds this, because the cup doesn't change, only the filter changes. Oh well, I guess I was trying to be proactive. But as you can see, there is quite a difference in color. And I wasn't having any issues with it running. This is just a 50-hour change out. Alright, now we're going to move on to the rear. Go ahead and get the transmission filter and the hydraulic oil filter. These were actually much easier to access and much easier to get off than that oil filter. And again, these are all size specific, and you'll notice it's already out of the box there. These have the same rubber O-ring on them, just like the oil filter. And so I use the hydraulic fluid, or the transmission fluid. Either way you want to look at it, they're both universal. It's the same product on that O-ring prior to installing it. And just verifying the size. When these 3 filters, technically 4 filters came, they were size specific. So there was no way to, in theory, mess it up. The oil filter was one size, transmission's one size, hydraulic fluid filters one size. Now here I knew the fluid was going to come rushing out pretty good, so I moved the camera. Well, when I moved the camera, of course the camera decided to do its own autofocus, so sorry about the focus. It'll come back in once it gets the writing off of the white filter. Now I'm sure you probably could find these products non-Kabota at a cheaper price. I didn't want to take a chance on buying something that was not OEM, so to speak. Because this was a brand new tractor, I wanted to make sure I did the proper maintenance to keep it under warranty. So here we're at the rear of the tractor. You got this little plastic pop cap, for lack of better terms, which is where you refill your transmission / your hydraulic fluid. So I pulled it out. I actually should have wiped it off first for contaminants and then pulled it out. So I'm kind of doing it a little bit backwards. And then you'll see as I move the rag back out of the way, that little yellow knobby thing is your dipstick fluid checker, your hydraulic dipstick. There we go. Anyway, a really cool trick, and I didn't show it here in the beginning, I do on the next shot. Take a white napkin or paper towel, and when you're checking your fluid, just when you have that clear fluid that you're checking, sit it on the white paper towel, and the wetness will show you how full that fluid is on the dipstick. It worked great. Now when I filled it up here, I ended up having it right to the maximum of full, and I was like, wait a minute, let me double check that. So I double checked it, and it was right on the limit, the upper limit. But by the time I started it up, took it out, drove it around a couple times, moved the buckets and things around where I had lubed them up or greased the fittings, it was right in the middle where it needed to be. Again, don't forget, put your cap on as soon as you pull that funnel out. You'll go driving off and lose it out in the back 40 somewhere. So about the only thing we have left at this point was going ahead and lubricating the grease fittings. Now, the tractor has some universal fittings, and then you'll have other fittings like here with the front end loader. So I only showed how I filled a couple of them. Shows putting the grease gun on there and then just squeezing the grease down in there until you see it start oozing out on the sides. And there you can see it a little bit. On the next one that I used as an example, you can actually see it even better. So when you push that grease gun down on there, it's kind of tough, but you'll feel kind of like a little click, like you heard it there. And then you're going to squeeze it, and then you'll start seeing that grease come out. Once you start seeing that grease come out, you're good to go. Don't keep going and going and going. Now I did move the camera here to give you just a little bit better view. And right there you can see how it's starting to work its way out. And there's our girl Stella Alrighty then, I want to thank y'all for stopping by. Have a wonderful and blessed day. Don't forget to vote, and I'll see you next time on How I Did It.